Son leaves parents on the side of the road, but when he goes to see his inheritance, Michael Anthony pulled his imported car over onto the dusty shoulder of the road that cut through the Pennsylvania countryside and ordered his parents to get out. His voice was cold, calculated, as if he were closing a business deal and not kicking out the two people who gave him life. "You can't stay with me anymore. I have a new family now, different responsibilities," he said, not even looking his parents in the eye as they got out of the car with their old worn-out suitcases. Richard held firmly onto his wife Margaret's trembling arm while trying to process what was happening. At 72 years old, he had worked his whole life as a mechanic in a small shop in Harrisburg to give his son everything he himself never had. Margaret, at 68, had spent decades taking care of the home, raising Michael with all the love and dedication a mother can offer. "Son, for God's sake, where will we stay?" asked Margaret, her voice choked with tears she was trying to hold back. "That's no longer my problem," replied Michael, already getting back into the car. "You'll figure it out. You always have before." The couple watched the car disappear over the horizon, leaving only a cloud of red dust that mixed with the scorching afternoon sun. Margaret leaned on her husband, feeling her legs go weak. 45 years of marriage, a whole life dedicated to their only son, and now they were there, abandoned like two old dogs on a deserted road. "What are we going to do, Richard?" she whispered, finally letting the tears flow. Richard looked around. Fields of sugarcane stretched as far as the eye could see, interrupted only by a few scattered houses in the distance. The hot asphalt shimmered with heat waves. He squeezed his wife's hand tighter. "We'll figure it out, Margaret. We always have." 20 minutes passed before a cargo truck appeared on the road. The driver, a middle-aged man with a dirty cap and a kind smile, stopped when he saw them. "You folks need some help?" he asked, getting down from the cab. "Our son," Margaret began, but her voice failed. "We need a ride to the nearest town," said Richard, trying to maintain his dignity. "Hop on in. My name is Jack Smith. I've been hauling cargo around these parts for 15 years. During the ride, Jack sensed something wasn't right. The couple carried only 2 old suitcases and seemed lost, with no clear destination. "Do you folks have a place to stay?" he asked gently. Richard and Margaret exchanged glances. The truth was they didn't. Michael had sold the house they lived in for 30 years, claiming he needed the money to pay for family medical debts. They had discovered this just the day before, when they arrived home and found strangers measuring the rooms. "The house was ours, Jack," said Richard, finally finding the strength to tell the story. "My son sold it without telling us. He said it was to pay debts, but he lied," Margaret finished, the bitterness evident in her voice. "We found out he used the money to buy a new apartment for his wife. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing." Jack shook his head, indignant. He had seen a lot on the road, but abandoning elderly parents always broke his heart. "I know a good inn in Pleasant Hill. The owner is a special person, Mrs. Constance. I'm sure she'll help you." The Hope Inn was on a quiet street in Pleasant Hill, a small town of 15,000 people, nestled among hills covered with eucalyptus trees. The old building, painted light blue, had flower-filled balconies and a well-kept garden that showed the care of its owner. Constance Mary Wilson was 58 years old and had a heart too big for her own good, as she always said. When Jack told her about the couple's situation, she didn't hesitate. "You can stay in the back room," she said, without mentioning payment. "It's simple but clean and cozy." "Mrs. Constance, we can't pay right now, but—" began Richard. "First you get settled. Then we'll talk about that," she interrupted with a motherly smile. "Tonight you'll have dinner with me and the other guests. I won't take no for an answer." That evening, seated at the inn's dining table alongside 2 travelers and a retired couple passing through, Richard and Margaret began to feel a little less lost. Constance's home-cooked meal, cowboy beans, sautéed collard greens and chicken stew, brought back memories of happier times. "Are you from Harrisburg?" asked Constance, serving Margaret another spoonful of rice. "We lived there our whole lives," replied Richard. I worked at an auto repair shop for 40 years. Margaret took care of the home and raised our son. And what does he do? The silence that followed was heavy. Margaret pushed the food around her plate, her appetite gone. He owns a trucking company, Richard finally said. Or he did. We don't know anything about his life anymore. Constance sensed the topic was painful and changed the subject. Later, when the other guests had retired, she sat with the couple on the porch. You don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to, but I see a lot of pain in your eyes. And if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that carrying pain alone only makes it heavier. It was then that Margaret broke down. She spoke of the years of devotion to their son, how he changed after he got married, the silent humiliations, the ignored pleas for help, and finally, the abandonment on the roadside. He said we're no longer his problem, she whispered through tears. After all we did. Constance held Margaret's hand firmly. You are not a problem. You are human beings who deserve dignity and love. And here, in my home, you will have that. Meanwhile, in Harrisburg, Jessica was beginning to suspect something wasn't right. Married to Michael for 2 years, she had grown used to the constant presence of her in-laws in the house. Suddenly, they had simply vanished. Where are your parents? She asked when Michael came home from work the day after the abandonment. They went to visit some distant relatives out in the country, he replied without meeting her eyes. They'll be away for a while. But Jessica had seen her in-laws' personal belongings still scattered around the rooms. Richard's cane was leaning against the dresser. The embroidery Margaret was working on remained on the side table, and her blood pressure medication was still in the bathroom. How strange that they didn't take her medication, she remarked. They must have forgotten. I'll take it to them later. Jessica wasn't convinced. She knew her husband well enough to recognize when he was lying. There was a nervousness in his voice, a rush to change the subject that wasn't normal. The next day, while Michael was at work, she decided to investigate. She found torn papers in the garage trash and patiently managed to piece some together. The words farm, inheritance, and Richard Anderson Miller appeared on the fragments. Jessica grew even more intrigued. She had never heard of any farm in the family. She decided to call a friend who worked at the county property records office. Jessica, I found some interesting things, her friend said on the phone a few days later. There is indeed a rural property registered in your father-in-law's name. An old coffee farm on the outskirts of Pleasant Hill. Pleasant Hill? Where's that? In rural Pennsylvania, about 2 hours from Harrisburg. But there's more, Jessica. The documentation has been irregular for decades, and recently someone tried to make inquiries about this property. Jessica's heart raced. She was beginning to understand why Michael was so nervous and why her in-laws had traveled right now. At Hope Inn, Richard had developed a routine. Every morning after breakfast, he would sit on the porch with an old notebook and draw strange maps. Constance noticed the habit and, moved by curiosity, asked about the drawings. They're memories, he said, somewhat embarrassed. My grandfather had a rural property. I was a child when he passed away, but I remember going there a few times with my father. And what happened to the property? Richard sighed deeply. My father never wanted to regularize the documentation. He was afraid of trouble with other heirs, lawsuits, that sort of thing. When he passed away, the situation became even more complicated. Margaret, who was sitting nearby embroidering, added, We were always afraid to touch this matter. Richard worked so much at the workshop that there was no time to deal with paperwork, and as the years passed, the matter was forgotten. But where is this farm? Asked Constance. If my memory serves me right, it was right around here. My grandfather called it Benedict Farms. It was a coffee producer during the region's golden age. Constance's eyes widened. Before opening the inn, she had worked for 20 years as a real estate agent in Pleasant Hill. She knew the history of the rural properties in the region very well. Richard, do you have any idea where the documents for this farm are? I have some old papers stored in a briefcase, but I never understood much about bureaucracy. Can I take a look? I still have contacts at the county clerk's office. Maybe we can clarify this situation. That same afternoon, Constance examined the yellowed documents that Richard had kept for decades. They were old deeds, outdated maps, and correspondence between his grandfather and former lawyers. "Richard, Margaret, you have no idea what you have in your hands," she said with growing excitement. "This documentation proves that you are the legitimate heirs of a property that is now worth a fortune." "What do you mean, Constance?" asked Margaret. "Benedict Farms is in an area that has become an urban expansion zone of Pleasant Hill. In recent years, several similar properties have been sold to construction companies and developers for millions." Richard and Margaret looked at each other, incredulous. "But that's impossible," he said. "We're simple people. We never had anything of value." "Sometimes life surprises us, Richard. Let me make some inquiries with my old colleagues. If I'm right, you might be sitting on a small fortune." Meanwhile, in Harrisburg, Michael started receiving strange calls. First from the county clerk's office asking about inventory of undeclared assets, then from a law office questioning about a rural property. "What rural property?" he asked nervously. "Mr. Michael, aren't you the son of Richard Anderson Miller?" questioned the receptionist. "I am, but—" "Then we have some matters to clarify about a family inheritance. Could you come to our office?" Michael hung up the phone with trembling hands. Inheritance? What inheritance? His parents had always been simple people, workers without significant assets. Or at least that's what he had always believed. That weekend, he decided to look for a distant cousin who still kept in touch with the family. Brian lived in the countryside and knew the ancestors' history better. "Michael, didn't you know about Benedict Farms?" asked Brian, surprised. "Your grandfather always talked about it. It was the largest coffee plantation in the region in his time. But what happened to that farm? Your father never wanted to deal with the bureaucracy. He was afraid of trouble, of spending money on lawyers and ending up losing everything, but the property always belonged to the family." "And where are my parents now? I need to talk to them." Brian looked at him strangely. "I don't know, Michael. I haven't heard from them in weeks. Actually, I was finding it strange because your mother always calls me every Sunday." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Michael left his cousin's house with a feeling of panic growing in his chest. He was beginning to realize the magnitude of the mistake he had made. Not only had he abandoned his parents on a deserted road, but he had possibly also kept them from a valuable inheritance that could change the entire family's life. Back in Pleasant Hill, Constance had confirmed his suspicions. Benedict Farms not only existed and was properly registered in Richard's family name, but it was also located in a high-demand real estate area. "The property is 120 hectares, she explained to the couple on the inn's porch. "One part is being courted by a large supermarket chain that wants to build a distribution center. Another part interests a developer who is planning a country house community. But that means—" Margaret began. "It means you're millionaires, Margaret, and you didn't even know." Richard got up from his chair and walked to the porch railing, looking at the mountains in the distance. All his life, he had considered himself an unlucky man, working hard to give his son what he himself never had, accepting silent humiliations, living a simple and modest life. "Constance, I have a question," he said, turning around. "If this inheritance really exists, why was my son so desperate to get us out of the house? Maybe he discovered something and didn't want to share it with you," she suggested. "No," said Margaret, with deep sadness in her voice. "We know our son. He's not a bad person. He wasn't like this before. He just changed." "Changed how?" asked Constance. "After he got married, he started to see us as a burden. His wife doesn't like us, that's clear, and he started getting into debt. His business started going bad. I think he saw us as just another problem to solve. But abandoning you on a road, that was desperation," said Richard. "Our son was desperate and made the worst choice of his life." That same week, Jessica made a decision that would change everything. Without telling Michael, she took the car and drove to Pleasant Hill. It wasn't hard to find information about an elderly couple in a small town. The third person she asked on the street directed her to the Hope Inn. When she knocked on the door, she was greeted by Constance. "I'm looking for Richard and Margaret Anderson Miller," she said, nervous. "And who is looking for them?" "I'm Jessica, their daughter-in-law." Constance studied her for a moment. then shouted into the house, "Mrs. Margaret, you have a visitor?" When Margaret appeared at the door and saw Jessica, her face transformed into a mixture of surprise and pain. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to get you. I came to apologize for what Michael did." "Where is my son?" asked Margaret, trying to maintain her composure. "He doesn't know I'm here. But I found out some things, and I think you have the right to know." Constance invited them in and served coffee in the inn's living room. Jessica told them about her investigation, about the torn papers she found, about the strange calls Michael was receiving. "Your husband is desperate, Jessica," said Richard, who had joined the conversation. "And when a person is desperate, they do things they never imagined they would do. But that doesn't justify what he did to you," she replied with tears in her eyes. "I'm pregnant, and I don't want my child to grow up without knowing their grandparents. I don't want them to grow up in a family torn apart by pride and greed." Margaret choked on her coffee. "You're pregnant?" 3 months. That's exactly why I'm here. A child needs a united family, not fragments scattered by resentment. In that moment, Constance understood she was witnessing the beginning of the healing of a deep family wound. But she also knew the road would be long and painful. "Jessica, your in-laws have discovered some important things about the family," she said. "Perhaps it would be best for you all to talk calmly about all this." In the hours that followed, Richard and Margaret told their daughter-in-law about the farm inheritance and the plans they were making to settle the situation. Jessica listened in silence, beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. "Will you forgive Michael?" she finally asked. "Forgiving is one thing," said Margaret. "Forgetting is another. And trusting, well, that will take time." "He needs to prove he's truly changed," added Richard, "not with pretty words, but with actions. What if you came back home? I could talk to him, explain—" "Jessica," Margaret gently interrupted. "We no longer have a home. Michael sold our house, and even if we did, things wouldn't go back to how they were just because you asked." "Then what will you do?" "First, we'll resolve the inheritance matter," said Richard. "Then we'll decide what to do with our lives." "And Michael?" "Michael will have to make his own decisions," replied Margaret. "If he wants to be part of our lives again, he knows where we are." Jessica returned to Harrisburg with a divided heart. She knew she needed to tell her husband about the visit, but she feared his reaction. Michael had become an unpredictable person in recent months, alternating between moments of anger and deep melancholy. "Where were you today?" he asked when she arrived home. "I went for some medical exams," she lied. "What exams?" "For the baby, Michael. I already told you about this." He looked at her suspiciously but didn't press the matter. Lately his mind was too occupied with company problems and strange calls about inheritances to pay attention to anything else. The next day Michael received an official summons. A law office in Pleasant Hill requested his presence to deal with family estate matters. The document specifically mentioned Benedict Farms and cited his parents as the legitimate owners of the property. "This can't be right," he murmured, rereading the paper for the 3rd time. He called the office and scheduled a meeting for the following week. Then he tried to call his parents, but the number was out of the coverage area. He tried to remember any relative who might have information about them, but realized with horror that he had drifted so far from the family that he didn't even know where to begin looking. In Pleasant Hill, Richard and Margaret were having a completely new experience. For the first time in decades, they felt valued and respected. Constance treated them like family. The other guests at the inn had grown fond of them, and the local community had adopted the couple as if they were long-time residents of the town. "Have you decided what you'll do when the farm matter is settled?" asked Constance one morning as they had coffee together. "We're thinking," said Margaret. "For a long time our life revolved entirely around Michael. Now we have to learn to live for ourselves." "And does that scare you?" "A little," admitted Richard. "We're simple people, Constance. We never imagined having money, never dreamed of any life other than the one we had. But you deserve to be happy. You deserve to enjoy the years you still have ahead of you." "We know that," said Margaret, "but we also know that money doesn't solve everything. Our greatest pain isn't not having had money, it's having lost our son." Constance held Margaret's hand tenderly. Sometimes we lose people only to find them again in a new, better way. Maybe that's what's happening with Michael. Or maybe he's lost forever, replied Margaret, with a sadness that showed in her eyes. That same day, Margaret was helping in the inn's kitchen when Constance called her to answer the phone. "It's for you, Mrs. Margaret." A woman's voice, Margaret answered with apprehension. "Hello? Mother-in-law, it's Jessica. Please don't hang up. What do you want, dear?" "I need to tell you something. Michael he's doing very poorly. The company is going bankrupt. He received notices about a family inheritance and doesn't understand anything, and I think he's having a nervous breakdown." Margaret felt her heart tighten. However much hurt she felt toward her son, he was still her little boy. "What do you want from me, Jessica?" "I want to know if there's any chance you would talk with him. He's destroying himself with guilt, but he's too proud to admit the mistake he made." "Jessica, you know your husband. Do you think he's truly sorry, or is he just worried about the inheritance money?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "To be honest, mother-in-law, I think it's a bit of both. But I also know he cries alone in the bathroom every night thinking I don't notice. And I know he keeps the photo of you three in his wallet, even after everything that happened." Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the tears threaten to come. "Where are the personal things that were left in the house?" "I kept everything in a separate room. I didn't let Michael throw anything away." "And the house?" "He still hasn't managed to sell the house. The paperwork has problems and, well, I think deep down he doesn't really want to let go of everything." Margaret talked with Richard about Jessica's call. He listened in silence, watching his wife struggle between hurt and maternal love. "What is your heart saying, Margaret?" he asked. "My heart is divided. One part wants to run to take care of my son like I always did. The other part is tired of suffering because of him." "And your head?" "My head says he needs to learn the consequence of his own actions, that we can't solve everything for him like we did his whole life. Then maybe the answer is in the middle." "How so?" "Maybe we can help him understand the inheritance situation, but make it clear our relationship won't go back to how it was just because he needs us." Margaret reflected on her husband's words. She had known Richard for over 40 years and knew he had a simple but profound wisdom. "Do you think we should go there? I think we should let him come here if he wants to. If he's truly changed, if he truly wants our presence in his life, let him prove it." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Margaret called Jessica back the next day. "Dear, we talked and decided this. If Michael wants to talk with us, he knows where we are, but this time he will have to make the first move." "But mother-in-law..." "There are no buts, Jessica. For years we ran after him, begged for his attention, accepted slights so we wouldn't lose the little contact we had. Now if he truly cares, let him prove it. And if he goes there, if he comes, we will talk. But that doesn't mean everything will automatically go back to how it was before." "I understand," said Jessica with a sigh. "I'll talk to him." Jessica waited for the right moment to approach Michael. On Friday evening, when he came home visibly worn out after a difficult week, she prepared his favorite dinner and waited for him to relax a bit. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, serving coffee after dinner. "If it's about money, you know things are tight." "It's not about money. It's about your parents." Michael's face hardened immediately. "We have nothing to talk about regarding them." "Yes, we do. I know where they are." Michael stopped stirring the sugar in his coffee and looked at his wife. "What do you mean, you know where they are?" "I went after them, Michael. They went to Pleasant Hill. They're at an inn called Hope. And they found out they're heirs to a valuable property." "What property?" "Benedict Farms, the same one you've been getting calls about." Michael turned pale. For weeks, he had been trying to understand the inheritance calls, but he was too afraid to admit he didn't know where his parents were to ask them directly. "And are they okay?" "Physically, yes. Emotionally." "Well, you abandoned them on a deserted road, Michael. How do you think they are?" "Jessica, you don't understand. The situation was impossible. The company is bankrupt. We have the baby coming. And you thought throwing your parents out on the street would solve anything? Michael got up from the table and went to the window, looking at the backyard where he had played as a child. I wasn't thinking straight, I was desperate. And now I'm even more desperate. Without them, without the company, not knowing what to do. They said if you want to talk, you know where to find them. But this time, you'll have to go after them. What if they don't forgive me? Then you'll have to learn to live with the consequences of your choices. Michael spent the entire weekend thinking about the conversation with Jessica. On one hand, his pride screamed that he shouldn't go after his parents after they had discovered the inheritance. On the other, a deep pain in his chest told him he had made the biggest mistake of his life. On Monday, after a difficult morning trying to save contracts that were being cancelled, Michael made a decision. He took the car and drove to Pleasant Hill. The Hope Inn was exactly as Jessica had described, simple, welcoming, with an air of peace he hadn't felt in months. When he knocked on the door, he was greeted by a middle-aged woman with a kind look. "You must be Michael," said Constance without needing introductions. "How did you know? Your father has a picture of you in his wallet, and you look very much alike." "My parents. Are they?" "They're on the back porch. But before you go talk to them, can I give you some advice?" Michael nodded. "Don't go there with ready-made excuses or elaborate explanations. Go with an open heart and acknowledge the pain you caused. They're simple people, but they're not fools." Michael walked through the inn until he reached the back porch. His parents were sitting in wicker chairs, Richard reading a newspaper and Margaret embroidering. When they saw him, both froze. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice choked. Margaret let her embroidery fall into her lap. Richard folded the newspaper slowly, without taking his eyes off his son. "What did you come here for, Michael?" asked Richard, without hostility, but with coldness. I came to ask for forgiveness." "Forgiveness for what?" Michael approached and, to his parents' surprise, knelt before their chairs. "Forgiveness for abandoning you. Forgiveness for selling your house without telling you. Forgiveness for being an ungrateful and cruel son. Forgiveness for throwing away 40 years of love and dedication because of my desperation and greed." Margaret began to cry silently. Richard kept his gaze fixed on his son, trying to decipher whether this remorse was genuine or self-serving. "And what changed, Michael?" asked his father. "What made you come after us now?" "Jessica told me you discovered a valuable inheritance," said Michael, deciding to be completely honest. "And yes, at first I thought about the money. I thought about how it could save my company, my family, but then what? Then I realized I had already lost what truly mattered long before discovering any inheritance. I lost you. I lost your respect, your love, your trust. And that hurts more than any business bankruptcy." Margaret reached out and touched her son's face, wiping away a tear that was streaming down. "Son, you hurt us in a way that I don't know if it will ever heal." "I know, Mom, and if you never forgive me, I'll understand. But I needed to come here and say this in person." "Get up from there," said Richard, his voice softer. "I don't talk to my son on his knees." Michael got up and sat in a nearby chair. The three of them sat in silence for a few minutes, each processing the moment. "Michael, I'm going to ask some questions and I want honest answers," said Margaret finally. "Ask away." "Did you come here because of the inheritance or because of us?" Michael took a deep breath. "Both, Mom. It would be a lie to say the inheritance didn't influence me, but it would also be a lie to say I don't miss you every single day since I left you on that road." "Have you been crying?" The question took Michael by surprise. "What do you mean?" "Jessica told me you cry alone in the bathroom every night. Is it true?" Michael lowered his head. "It's true." "Why?" "Because I became a monster, Mom. Because I did something I never thought I was capable of doing. Because I look in the mirror and don't recognize myself." Richard leaned forward in his chair. "And your wife, how is she handling all this?" "Jessica is pregnant, and she told me she doesn't want our child to grow up in a broken family. That's why she came to find you." "She's a good woman," said Margaret. "A woman who cares about family even when her husband messes up. Yeah, she's better than I deserve." "And your company?" asked Richard. It's going bankrupt. I lost important contracts. I have debts piling up. Employees quitting. I'll probably have to close everything down in the next few months. And do you think the inheritance from the farm will solve your problems? Michael looked his father in the eyes. Dad, I don't even know if you'll want to share anything with me after what I did. And honestly, after everything that happened, I don't feel entitled to ask for anything. But you would like us to help. I would like you to give me a chance to prove I can be a better son. Regardless of money or inheritance, Margaret and Richard looked at each other, communicating without words like only couples who have lived a whole life together can do. Michael, said Margaret, your father and I will talk about all this, about forgiveness, about family, about the inheritance, but we won't decide anything right now in the heat of emotions. I understand. Can you stay in town a few days? I can. Then find a place to sleep and come by here tomorrow for lunch. We'll talk calmly about everything. Michael nodded and got up to leave. As he was stepping off the porch, his father's voice made him stop. Michael. Yes, Dad. I'm glad you came. Regardless of everything, I'm glad you came. That night, Michael stayed at a small hotel in downtown Pleasant Hill. He couldn't sleep, replaying in his mind every moment of the conversation with his parents. There was a mix of hope and fear in his chest that he couldn't define. At the Hope Inn, Richard and Margaret also spent the night awake talking about the reunion with their son. What did you think, Richard? Asked Margaret, lying on the simple but comfortable bed in the room that had become their home. I thought he was different, more humble, more broken, but I don't know if this change is permanent or if it's just desperation. And the inheritance? The inheritance is ours, Margaret. We worked our whole lives. We were always honest. We always helped those in need. If God gave us this blessing in our final years, it's for us to enjoy. And Michael? Michael will have to prove he's truly changed. If he proves it, he might have a small place in our new life. If he doesn't, we'll move forward without him, Margaret completed. Could you do it? After what we went through on that road, Richard, I discovered I'm stronger than I imagined. If necessary, yes, I can. The next day, Michael arrived at the inn at lunchtime. Constance had prepared a feast: chicken with okra, rice, beans, toasted cassava flour, sautéed collard greens, and dulce de leche for dessert. The table was set for 4 people. You don't need to include me, Mrs. Wilson, said Michael, embarrassed. In this house, no one goes without eating, she replied firmly. And besides, your family has important things to discuss. During lunch, the conversation was light, about the town, about the food, about the weather. Michael noticed that his parents seemed more relaxed, happier than he had seen in years. There was a peace in them that he couldn't identify. Your parents told me you're a businessman, said Constance. I was. Now I don't know what I am anymore. Why do you say that? The business is failing. I lost the trust of clients, suppliers, employees, and most importantly, I lost trust in myself. And what do you plan to do? Michael looked at his parents before answering. I'm trying to figure that out. Maybe it's time to start all over again in a different way. Different how, asked Richard. Simpler, more honest, closer to family. After lunch, the 4 of them sat on the front porch of the inn. Constance discreetly withdrew to give the family privacy. Michael, began Margaret, your father and I talked a lot last night. We have some things to tell you. I'm listening. First, about forgiveness. We forgive you, son. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean our relationship will automatically go back to how it was before. I understand. Second, about the inheritance. It's true we discovered a valuable family property. Constance is helping us sort out all the paperwork, and in a few weeks we'll be able to decide what to do with it. Michael nodded, trying to control his anxiety. And third, continued Richard, about you. If you've really changed, if you really want to be part of our life again, you'll have to prove it with actions, not just words. What do you want me to do? We want you to stay here in town for a while. We want to see you every day. We want to talk with you. We want to understand who you've become after everything that happened. And my business in Harrisburg? If it's really failing, maybe it's better for you to accept that and think about starting over here. suggested Margaret. Here. Doing what? We don't know yet, but Pleasant Hill is a good town, with good people. Maybe you'll find a new path here. Michael felt a mixture of relief and fear. His parents' proposal represented a chance for a fresh start, but it also meant admitting he had lost everything he built in Harrisburg. And if I agree to stay here, what about the inheritance? The inheritance is ours, Michael, said Richard firmly. Ours and Jessica's, who will be the mother of our grandchild. If you prove you've changed, you might have a share, but that will be decided in time. And if I can't prove it? Then at least you will have tried, replied Margaret, and we will have tried too. Michael spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the streets of Pleasant Hill, thinking about his parents' proposal. The town was small, peaceful, the opposite of the hectic life he had led in Harrisburg. There was something comforting about the simplicity of the place. That evening he called Jessica. "How did it go?" she asked, eager. "Better than I expected, and harder than I imagined." "What do you mean?" "They forgave me, Jessica. But they made it clear that forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. I'll have to prove that I've really changed." "And how will you do that?" "They want me to stay here in town for a while, that I spend time with them, that they see who I am now." "And will you stay?" "I don't know. It would mean admitting that I lost everything in Harrisburg. It would mean starting over from scratch at 35. "Michael, you've already lost everything." "Already lost. The question now is whether you want to rebuild alone or with your family by your side." His wife's words echoed in Michael's mind all night long. The next morning, he returned to the inn with the decision made. "Dad, Mom, I accept your proposal," he said. "I will stay in Pleasant Hill. I will close the company, sell what can be sold, pay off the debts I can pay off, and start over here." Margaret smiled for the first time since their reunion. "Are you sure, son?" "I am. And I want you to know it's not because of the inheritance, it's because I want to get my family back." "And what about Jessica?" asked Richard. "I spoke with her yesterday. She's going to move here too. She wants our son to grow up near his grandparents." In the following weeks, Michael began the process of transferring his life. It wasn't easy. He had to sell the apartment for less than half of what he had paid for it, liquidate the company under unfavorable conditions, and face the disappointment of employees and suppliers. But with each day in Pleasant Hill, he felt he was making the right decision. He spent time daily with his parents, helped Constance at the inn, and got to know the local community. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of constant anxiety on his shoulders. The documentation for Benedict Farms was being regularized with the help of a specialized law firm. The initial assessments confirmed what Constance had suspected. The property was worth a significant amount, especially considering the interest from companies in acquiring it. "Richard, Margaret," said the lawyer during a meeting at the inn, "you have several options. You can sell the entire property for a high price and split the money. You can sell part and keep part for yourselves. Or you can develop the property in other ways." "What other ways?" asked Margaret. "Well, part of the farm has tourism potential. You could develop a rural tourism project. Another part could be leased for agriculture. And the part that interests the companies could be sold or rented." Michael listened to the conversation in silence. His parents still hadn't defined what his share of the inheritance would be, and he was trying not to show anxiety about it. "And, financially, what would be the best option?" asked Richard. "It depends on your goals. If you want the most money in the shortest time, sell everything. If you want a steady long-term income, divide the property and develop each part according to its potential." "Can we think about all this?" "Of course, there's no rush." That night, the family gathered on the inn's porch to talk about the options. "What do you all think?" asked Richard. "I think we don't need a lot of money," said Margaret. "We're simple people, we always have been. Too much money can bring problems we don't know how to solve." "I agree," said Richard, "but I also think we can use part of this inheritance to do some good for other people." "What do you mean, Dad?" asked Michael. "Constance took us in when we had nowhere to go. There are many people in the situation we were in. Maybe we can create something to help other families going through hard times." Michael felt a surge of pride for his parents. Even after suffering so much, they still thought about helping others. "And what about you, Michael?" asked Margaret. "What do you think?" "I think you're right. And I think it would be a beautiful way to turn a material inheritance into something that truly makes a difference in people's lives." Richard looked at his son with approval. "Are you serious, or just trying to please us?" "I'm serious, Dad. Over the past few months, I've learned that money without family is worthless, and family without values is worthless too." 3 months later, everyone's lives had completely changed. Jessica had moved to Pleasant Hill and was loving the tranquility of the small town. Her pregnancy was progressing well, and having her in-laws nearby made her feel more secure. Michael had opened a small mechanics shop in town, using the skills he learned from his father in his youth. He didn't earn much, but enough to modestly support his family. The farm inheritance was divided strategically. One part was sold to the supermarket chain for a significant amount, another part was turned into a support center for the elderly and families in need, managed by Constance and funded by the family. The third part was kept as a reserve, generating income through agricultural leasing. "Are you sure you don't want a larger share of the money?" asked the lawyer when the final paperwork was signed. "I'm sure," said Richard. "What we need to live well we already have. The rest is better used helping other people. And what about you, Michael? Do you agree with this division?" Michael looked at his parents, at his pregnant wife, at Constance, who had become like a second mother to them. "I fully agree. My family gave me a second chance. Now it's our turn to give second chances to other people." 6 months later, Ethan was born, the first grandchild of Richard and Margaret. The delivery was smooth, and the baby came into the world surrounded by much love. "Look, Richard," whispered Margaret, holding her grandson for the first time. "Do you think he'll grow up knowing how loved he is?" "I'm sure he will," replied the grandfather, with tears in his eyes. "Because this time we're going to do everything right." Michael watched the scene from the hospital room window. Jessica slept peacefully, tired, but happy. His parents took turns holding their grandson. Constance had brought flowers from the inn's garden. "What are you thinking about?" asked Jessica, waking up. "I'm thinking about how I almost lost all this, how foolish I was to think money was more important than family." "But you didn't lose it. In the end, everything worked out." "Because you gave me a chance I didn't deserve." "Michael, stop tormenting yourself. You made a mistake, you acknowledged it, you changed, and now we're here. That's what matters." 1 year later, the Benedict Farms Family Support Center was running at full speed. It served dozens of families in the region, offering everything from psychological support to job training. "Have you seen last month's statistics?" said Constance at a board meeting. "We managed to reunite 15 families that were separated due to financial problems." "And the training program?" asked Margaret. "We have 42 people taking vocational courses. And the partnership with local businesses is ensuring jobs for almost all graduates." Michael, who had become the center's project coordinator, presented the financial sustainability numbers. "With the income from the farm lease and the donations we're receiving, we can maintain all activities without relying solely on the initial reserve." "So the project will sustain itself?" asked Richard. "Exactly. And if we keep growing at this rate, in 2 years we could open a branch in another city." That evening the family gathered on the inn's porch for the weekly dinner that had become a tradition. Ethan, 1 year old, crawled between his grandparents, making everyone laugh. "Can you believe it's been 2 years since we met on that road?" said Margaret, rocking her grandson on her lap. "It feels like a lifetime," replied Michael. "It was a lifetime," said Richard. "The old life ended that day, and a new one began." "And do you regret anything?" asked Jessica. "The suffering, yes," replied Margaret, "but not the outcome. If we hadn't been through all that, we might never have discovered how strong we are together. And maybe I would never have learned what really matters in life," added Michael. "And what matters?" asked Ethan, with his little child's voice. "You, my son. You and our whole family." 5 years had passed since that day on the road. The Hope Inn had expanded and become a landmark in the region. The Family Support Center served over 200 families a year. Michael's workshop was thriving. More important than all that, the family was united and happy. Ethan had grown up surrounded by love, learning family stories, and understanding values of solidarity and forgiveness. "Grandpa, tell the story again about when you got lost on the road," the boy asked one Sunday afternoon. "We didn't get lost, Ethan," corrected Richard, with his grandson on his lap. "We found each other." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes you need to get lost to find the right path. Sometimes the bad things that happen to us are the beginning of very good things." "And was Daddy mean before?" Michael laughed at his son's innocence. "Your father wasn't mean, Ethan. He was lost, confused, but then he found his way back home." "And did you forgive him?" "We forgave him," said Margaret, "because that's what family is. We fight, we hurt each other, but in the end, we always forgive and stay together." "Forever?" "Forever." That night, after Ethan fell asleep, the adults gathered on the porch to talk about future plans. "Constance told me an interesting proposal came in today," commented Michael. "What proposal?" asked Richard. "A television network wants to do a story about the support center. It seems our story caught their attention, and they want to show how we turned a bad situation into something positive. And do you think we should accept?" asked Margaret. "I think so," said Jessica. "If our story can inspire other families to reconcile, it's worth it." "I agree," said Richard, "but on one condition." "What?" "I want them to make it very clear that it wasn't easy, that forgiveness doesn't happen overnight, and that rebuilding a family requires a lot of work from everyone. And most importantly," added Margaret, "it wasn't money that solved our problems. It was love, patience, and the willingness to start over." The story aired 3 months later and had an unexpected impact. Hundreds of families from across the country contacted the support center, sharing similar stories and asking for help. "It seems we've touched a national nerve," said Constance at a board meeting. "What do you mean?" asked Michael. "Elder abandonment, families torn apart by money, children who no longer speak to their parents. Our story isn't unique. There are thousands of families going through the same situation. And what can we do? We can expand. Create a network of support centers. Train professionals in other cities. Turn this into a national cause." Margaret and Richard exchanged glances, remembering the conversation they had years ago about using the inheritance to help others. "Are you in?" asked Margaret. "If you're in, we're in," replied Richard. "Then let's move forward," said Michael. "Let's turn our second chance into the second chance for thousands of families." And that's exactly what they did. In the following years, the Benedict Family Support Network spread across dozens of American cities. Each unit followed the same principle: provide support for families in crisis, promote reconciliation, offer vocational training for those in need, and create a community solidarity network. Ethan grew up watching his parents and grandparents dedicated to this mission. He learned early on that problems exist to be solved, that families can heal from deep hurts, and that every person has the power to transform their own story. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to work for the network too," he said at 10 years old. "Why, son?" "Because I want to help other families stay together like ours did." Michael hugged his son, feeling deep emotion. "You know something, Ethan? I think that's the greatest legacy I can leave you." "What legacy?" "The certainty that it's always worth fighting for family, it's always worth forgiving, and it's always worth starting over." On the porch of Hope Inn, now transformed into the national headquarters of the network, a plaque recalled the story that had changed so many lives. Here began the journey of a family that got lost to find itself, that got hurt to heal, and that discovered love is always stronger than hurt. Dedicated to all families who still believe in the possibility of a new beginning. And every evening when the day's activities ended, 4 generations gathered on the same porch where it all began. Richard, now 82 years old, still sharp and active. Margaret, 78, coordinating social projects with the energy of someone who discovered their true calling later in life. Michael, transformed into a man dedicated to family and community. Jessica, fulfilling the dream of watching her son grow up in a united family. And Ethan, carrying in his smile the certainty that he belongs to a lineage of people who know the true value of family love. The story that began with abandonment on a dusty road had transformed into a lesson in hope that would echo through generations. End of story. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this story of new beginnings and forgiveness? Do you believe families can heal from such deep hurts? Have you experienced something similar, or know someone who went through a similar situation? Share your honest thoughts in the comments about the choices Michael and his parents made throughout this journey. Your participation enriches our community and inspires us to keep sharing stories that touch the heart. Don't forget to leave your like if the story moved you, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other narratives about family, forgiveness, and second chances.